Hello, my name is Jessica Mabe. I am Programs Coordinator for the International Alliance. I was also previously member of the PALS and CALS Advisory Council, and I was the caregiver alongside my father for my mom who bravely fought her ALS-MND diagnosis. As Angelique mentioned in her presentation about PALS, the PCAC reviews the fundamental rights every year. This year, we identified that the pandemic exacerbated how much caregivers were doing, and the fundamental rights we had in place no longer covered what they did. So we went through an exercise to see what would be the best way to portray the caregiver rights. First, we created an updated version of what we had, which included a section at the end. We also created a version that completed the PALS rights, and there was a standalone version. This last one was clear to be the best approach for this document, as we all agreed on their importance to stand on their own. In February 2021, an independent document on the fundamental rights for caregivers is created, as their needs and rights differed from those of the person living with ALS, but also of great importance. You have likely seen the slide before, but it is important to highlight it. Our aspirational statement is that these fundamental rights represent the ideal for individuals living with ALS-MND and caregivers worldwide. These documents represent the set of rights all Alliance member organizations should adopt and promote as conditions, systems, and resources allow. I know you're all keen to learn more about the data, so I'll quickly go through the fundamental rights for caregivers of people living with ALS-MND. Caregivers have the right to have access to information and education, to training and resources, to timely appointments and treatments, to remuneration. They also have the right to support in all areas and to provide input on the healthcare and support systems. So let's start with a few key demographics. Data collection began with a soft launch on Thursday, August 19th, and there was a rollout in full on Thursday, August 26th. Data collection closed in the morning of Monday, September 27th. We received responses from 32 countries. Total responses received were 1,086, and 474 responses, that's 44%, were from CALS. I want to let you know that the survey data raised more questions than answers. As I go through the next slides, I will pose some questions and you will have many more. We don't have the answers, but this will help us shape our future activities. This image reflects the fundamental rights. The color codes reflect the various categories of that right. The data you will see focused on global responses, and here you can see the agreement responses of the caregivers surveyed. What jumped at us was the very low agreement numbers. Overall, agreement was under 61% with a median of 30. Note how much lower this is to PALS and who had a median of 45, as Angelique mentioned in her presentation. Regardless of where you are in the world, caregivers feel very unsupported. Our orange bars represent the right to have access to information and education, to training and resources, to timely appointment and treatments. Several questions come to mind. These orange bars are the highest levels of agreement, but it should be higher, right? Our next bar refers to remuneration. 27% agreed that they received some type of remuneration or entitlement. Why is this figure so low? Our purple bars represent support in all areas that include counseling, emotional respite, time for themselves, palliative, and bereavement. Notice how low they are, an average level of agreement of 26%. And our blue bars represent the right to provide input with 33 and 32% agreement. The caregiver is the principal navigator of the respective healthcare system and care for the PALS. How can we help so they are listened to and taken into account? So let's dig further into these areas. Here we see only 61% agree to have access to information and education. We appreciate that there is a language barrier and most of the information is published in English. How can we help to improve the access to information and in a language that is easy to understand for a caregiver? I want to take a moment to share with you my experience. I was brought up bilingual as my father is British, but Spanish has always been my dominant language. I recall early in my mom's diagnosis, like so many caregivers, we go into a research mode and try to learn as much as possible about ALS and MND. And there is so much information out there. Impossible to filter what is reliable at that early stage, and trying to understand terms, symptoms, devices. At the time, most of the information I came across was in English, and it felt like I was reading in a completely unknown language. My point here is that if I felt that way in a language that I was fairly comfortable with, how do less fluent caregivers feel like? Here we see that 52% disagree to having access to regular training and resources to be able to better provide for the PALS at home. The level of agreement is lower, 47%, than that on the previous slide on access to information, which was 61%. I do wonder if this could be due to the element of training, and is training made available or offered to caregivers? On a personal note, I believe training for caregivers is key. I remember when we received the BiPAP, it felt so intimidating, and I was so scared of messing up the setup or breaking it. And it took me a while to get comfortable on how to clean it, but I'll be honest, I never learned how to configure it properly or read the data. I did ask the person who would come once a month to read the data to explain me or show me how to do it, but they wouldn't. They just did not want to show me. 49% do not have access to timely appointments and treatments. Could access to timely appointments be linked to the lack of specialists and high demand? How can we change this? We also know that stress on the caregiver increases when there is no or delayed access to treatments, appointments, and specialists. How can we help them? And we wonder, is access to timeless appointments a who can afford it scenario, or a where are you located or where do you live scenario? Let's talk now about remuneration. 69% disagreed that they receive remuneration, benefits, and entitlements to assist with provision of care. Caregivers sometimes have to stop working, resulting in additional financial burden and stress. Any type of remuneration, benefit, or entitlement can help to cover ALS-MND costs. In some cases, there might be some benefits, but CALs are just unaware of them. How can we help CALs be informed on what they can get? And can this global data help our member associations advocate for remuneration where it doesn't exist? Now, let's talk about support. As you can see in the image, all very low agreement figures. Only 37% agree that they received counseling. CALs also live with ALS-MND. How can we support them in their own ALS-MND journey? 28% of CALs agreed to having received support in palliative care, bereavement advice, and services. How and when these are addressed is key. The PALS journey is different from case to case, and this should be taken into account when discussing this with a caregiver. We need to be wary of the CAL's mental well-being at different stages of their ALS-MND journey. Only 27% of caregivers agree to receiving support for emotional support programs. How can we make emotional support programs available for CALs? For example, upon diagnosis, as ALS-MND progresses, during palliative care, bereavement, for management of loss and the experience lived, and in some cases, the management of PTSD. 22% agree to receiving social or respite support. As caregivers, we get told all the time, you need to make some time. Go and meet with your friends. This is always mentioned, but in reality, very difficult to apply. What can we do to help CALs have respite? As a former caregiver, I realize how hard this is. There is always something more important than ourselves. How can we help caregivers prioritize their well-being? Only 23% of caregivers agree to having time to care for themselves and to seek help when they need it. I think a big hurdle for caregivers is figuring out how to and open time to do so. CALs need help and guidance on being able to do this. How can we help them so that they know who, how, and where to get the support? 20% of caregivers agree in being able to plan for their own future. Thinking about the future is a major cause of stress for CALs. I know personally for me that this was due to feelings of fear and guilt, sadness, and a lot of the time there was simply just no time. What can we do to support CALs in thinking about their future, but with the appropriate support so that it is a positive impact and not a cause of stress? Overall, we can see CALs are feeling very unsupported. We really need to consider that CALs well-being has a direct effect on the PALS quality of life. What can we do to improve in all of these areas? Referring back to the PALS presentation, we know that access to support services like social workers and psychologists are key drivers for quality of care. And looking at these figures, this likely is the same case for cows. These two charts reflect the level of disagreement from cows in being able to provide input. The first image with 60%, cows disagree in being able to provide input on the healthcare and support system, including policymaking and care delivery. The second image with 61%, cows disagree in being able to provide input on the implementation of medical research procedures and protocols that affect PAWs and cows. It stands out that cows are feeling without a voice. At a point in the ALS-MND journey, the caregiver becomes the person that has to navigate the healthcare system, who liaises with the multidisciplinary team, who knows the treatments, the doses, the protocols, the pauses following, and what effect these have on both of them. Cows in their own way are experts in these areas, and there should be a channel where they can provide their input and seriously be taken into account, as they also live with ALS-MND and are affected by this diagnosis. How can we help cows so that they share their experiences so their input is also considered? To summarize, the Fundamental Rights Survey clearly reflected that caregivers feel a lack of support in all areas. These are training, remuneration, benefits, and entitlements to assist with provision of care, counseling, palliative care and bereavement advice and services, emotional support programs, self-time, social or respite support, and the ability to plan. They do not feel unable to provide input about their experiences or provide feedback on procedures and protocols. There is an overall feeling of not being listened or having a voice. My main message to you is to always remember that PAWs and CAWs are in the ALS-MND journey together. They have different needs, different challenges, but by providing them both with the right support system and resources, and like with everything in our ALS-MND fight, it is together that we can help them with their ALS-MND journey. We have now shared at a global level the survey data for PAWs and CAWs. So this is what comes next. We will be holding a webinar in the new year to discuss the data in even more detail. We will dig deeper into the data, development of further surveys. We will learn from the strengths and work on addressing the weak areas. We will identify the areas the Alliance needs to prioritize, and we will also share country-specific data with individual associations where statistically significant. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you, Jessica. So I think we've got Jessica and Kathy to answer any questions. I've got a couple of questions, and I know, Jessica, that you in your last slide you had the next steps, but I just wonder whether, just off the top of your head, what you see would be the priorities from these findings.
Great question. I really do think that we need to sort of drill down in the support component of things. I feel that the figures the survey showed were extremely low, and it's a very large bucket depending on the type of caregiver and what stage of the ALS-MND journey they're in. So I think we need to sort of try and prioritize from just that area is going to be quite challenging, and from there start to sort of drill down with regards to sort of how can we help our member associations with regards to this support, and do it as a joint effort. I think we're starting to move away from duplicating and triplicating and pretty much doing simultaneous efforts. I think if we can join together and streamline sort of the ways we can help, then we will be able to cover all the support areas a lot quicker.
That sounds good. Yeah, thank you. I just sort of thinking, because I saw your presentation or my time yesterday, and as well as this one, which really sort of, and I know you talked about, Jessica, in terms of sharing the data, the local data, but it makes me wonder whether some countries, and including Australia, actually do their own caregiver survey, and probably with a more localised set of questions. And do you think there's value in doing that, particularly from an advocacy perspective?
Totally. I think as much information as we can get, the better. And I think doing it locally, you know better the region and the circumstances. We at a global level, we had to sort of go very macro, but at a regional level, you understand more the challenges such as transportation, geographical difficulties, the financial situation of the country itself. So all of that contributes, and we would, we wish we could cover all of them, but if we went that micro, we would end up with an endless survey. So I think it's key for each sort of regional and countrywide to be able to capture that data. But again, at a macro level, we can also do a lot more things, combining forces, experiences, what works, what doesn't work, and help streamline.
Can I just add something to that, David, as well? Two things that Jess said, I just want to expand on a little bit. One is just as an example in terms of the fact that we were at a really macro level, and countries or nations can be at a more micro level. We have an example of that tonight. I think Sarah, our next presenter, is presenting on specifically on US data around caregivers. And the way I describe the way our presentations work together is we kind of describe the problem, and Sarah looks at the smaller mechanisms within each of those problems, as Jessica described, around geography and regional differences and so on. And the other thing I think we need to prioritize that comes out of this data is advocacy efforts around certain rights, particularly the remuneration right. And Jess probably has more to say on this than I do, but she led the networking session this morning on caregivers, and one of the worst rights in terms of a low figure for coming in for caregivers was the fact that caregivers do not get remuneration in most jurisdictions around the world. So again, that would be important to understand from a regional legislative perspective or a national legislative perspective. But it's also important to understand that we need to advocate globally for that. Jess, do you want to add to that? Because you had some surprising data this morning that emerged.
Yeah, and I'll use the opportunity to plug you to join at the networking session on the caregiving table. But we had a fantastic conversation earlier on today, and something that came out from the Belgian association was that on the Flemish side of Belgium, they have a remuneration for caregivers under 65. And don't quote me, I think they said between 63 and 65,000 euros a year for the caregiver, for their own well-being, whether it's an assistant, whether it's emotional support or programs. But we were all literally just, our jaws dropped at the figure. And we were like, wow, at least in Colombia, if we got like 1% of that, it would be incredible. But it was amazing, an amazing conversation. And this is what I mean about learning from the best and sort of try and, not replicate, but sort of learn what they did, what the process, and see how we can in some way emulate it in our own regions, and what can each individual association try and do to advocate. And I think what I'm loving about sort of what's happened sort of in the sessions is that there's been such a focus around caregivers. And I think that is key to just the conversation is hot, is happening, and it's about maintaining it and just sort of keeping it up together to sort of see how we can improve and keep sharing experiences to sort of see how we can keep improving.
Oh, good. Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jess and Kathy, and thank you so much for giving a voice to caregivers. So well done. So thank you.